networking going on behind us here at Scottish National Landlord Day 2013, and I'm joined now by Fiona Greer from TC Young, one of the sponsors. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Now, how important is it to have an event such as this that brings together all the stakeholders in the Scottish private rented sector?
Oh, it's very important. I think it's one of the sort of fundamental highlights of the year for everybody in the private sector. We've worked quite closely with SAL for a number of years now, and this is always a good forum to meet people. Quite often the clients that I work with, I just speak to them on the phone. I don't necessarily meet them face to face very often, so it's always good to put a face to a name and just to have a general chat about how things have been going and really what concerns people have in the sector, because it's such a changing sector.
Yes.
There's always something on the horizon. Landlords have been absolutely hammered by legislation recently, and there's more coming their way, so it's good to kind of get a feel about what people's sort of perceptions are and what their worries are, and to be able to just have that discussion with them.
And what do you think are the main issues facing Scottish landlords at the moment? Yes, we have looming regulation for lettings agents, but there are other issues as well.
I think the main issue for landlords at the moment is the actual tenancy regime. We heard this morning from the Housing Minister that we're about to get a new housing bill out, and they're looking quite closely at potentially changing the tenancy regime, which I think probably concerns a lot of landlords. I think from my point of view as a lawyer, that the regime that we're working with was set up in the 80s, and the private sector that we have in Scotland now is completely different, and we're servicing a completely different type of tenant. So I actually don't have a difficulty with having that regime changed, but I think the concern for landlords is that landlords are listened to as well as tenants. I think the perception from most landlords is that there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of legislation that landlords have to abide by, and tenants kind of don't necessarily have to abide by the same sets of rules. So I think it's important for landlords to feel that they are being listened to, and if there is going to be a change in the way that we operate tenancies in Scotland, that it operates both ways, and there are safeguards. Yes, absolutely, for tenants, because there needs to be, but also there are safeguards for landlords as well.
Well, I agree 100%. And how does TC Young support landlords? What services do you offer?
We provide a range of legal services for landlords. I specialise solely in housing law and have done so since I trained as a lawyer, and I work with private landlords and letting agents day in, day out, from setting up tenancy agreements and guiding them through the maze of paperwork that they have to go through, to bringing tenancy agreements to an end. If there are problems along the way, rent arrears, which is obviously a very common problem unfortunately, debt recovery, that sort of thing. Also things to do with HMO licensing. Quite often landlords face difficulties in their applications or appeals, so we can help them with that. Things to do with repairs, and the factoring, the new factoring legislation that's come in, we're getting quite a lot of queries about that as well. So basically anything to do with private sector tenancies, we can help them.
Brilliant. So just to finish, Fiona, would you say that overall the standards in the Scottish private rented sector are good, and there's obviously a real appetite for raising standards as well, as evidenced by all the people here?
Absolutely. I think the standard in the private rented sector in Scotland is very high. There is inevitably a very small minority of landlords and agents who don't do a good job, and I think it's important that landlords see that there's enforcement against those people. That always comes down to a funding issue and how that enforcement is carried out, but I think the standard is high, and I think there's very much an appetite for landlords and letting agents to become more involved, to shape the sector and to learn more. I'm involved with landlord accreditation with their training, and I'm always amazed at the numbers of landlords that they get through their doors wanting to learn and wanting more and more training sessions offered to them. They want to learn and they want to be part of the private rented sector and help it evolve.